To tell you a story about the origins of the method of Loci, also known as the Roman room or the memory palace technique. It dates back to about 500 BC, so over 2,000 years ago, and it concerns a poet, a lyric poet by the name of Simonides of Chios, of the Greek island of Chios. Apologies for my Greek pronunciation. And his employment was to create poems, lyric poems, about the greats and the nobles and the various important people in Greece. And he'd been commissioned to give a recital of a poem in honour of Scopas, a nobleman of Thessaly, at his banquet. And he gave this presentation of his poem that he'd written. At the end of the poem, Scopas was very displeased, because not only had he honoured his host in the poem, he'd also gave praise to the twin half-brothers, Castor and Pollux, who are the immortals, son of Leda in Greek mythology, and one of their fathers was Zeus, who disguised himself as a swan to seduce Leda. And they're the patron gods of sailors and travellers, and since Simonides had praised them, Scopas said, "I'll give you half your fee, and the gods can repay the other half." Shortly after having finished his recital, a messenger came in, gave him a message saying he had to come out. There were two men very insistent to see him outside. So he left the banqueting hall, went outside to see no one there. But it was obviously the gods had sent this message. And as soon as he stepped outside, the building collapsed, and everyone there was crushed under the falling masonry and debris from the hall. So he was the sole survivor. So as he was the only person left surviving, it was his task was then to identify the bodies and direct the relatives to their respective remains of their loved ones. And he discovered that he could remember where everyone was sitting, and therefore who they were, by their positions around the table, around the room. And that led him to the realisation that actually memory is associated to locations. The strongest memories are set in locations, and hence the idea of making associations between locations and the things you need to memorise in the method of loci. So although it's 2,500 years old, it's still used today. It's the exact same technique that most memorisers use when they're memorising, be it packs of cards or numbers, whatever it may be. They're still using imagination, association, and very importantly, location. It was later developed, taken from the Greeks and then developed by the Romans, and they used it equally well in their memory systems. Of course, way back in antiquity, it was too expensive to be able to use notes for speaking, because you had to hire a scribe. It was really important documents and trading transactions that could be written on papyrus or used on stone or clay, but not for the frivolity of making speeches. So they used these memory techniques to memorise the speeches when they used to talk in the fora and the two presentations. And of course, it's still very useful today. If you're giving a presentation yourself, you can use memory techniques of location around the room you're speaking in to memorise the key points and not miss any of the important things that you need to talk about. Something that politicians do a lot if they're speaking without notes, which is often what they try to do, to give a better connection with the people they're talking to. So hope that's been of interest. We'll talk about another story from the annals of memory history next week. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.